known as the father of the Panama Canal, first summoned Ralph Budd to become chief engineer of the Panama Railroad. From this moment on, the destiny of these two Jim Hill protégés became linked. Both went on to become presidents of American railroads that would one day become part of Burlington Northern. Stevens, the Spokane, Portland, and Seattle Railway, and Budd, the Great Northern and the Chicago, Burlington, and Quincy. I'm Bill Jackson, your host, and welcome to the Winter '91 edition of BN on Camera. Ralph Budd carried on Hill's vision of an ever-expanding American railroad system by initiating the most ambitious improvement program in railroad history. Budd completed the Cascade Tunnel, the longest railroad tunnel in the American continent, and extended the line down into California. His train, the Empire Builder, cut 7 hours off the Chicago West Coast run. He spearheaded the transition from steam to diesel power and introduced the first streamlined train, the Pioneer Zephyr. But of all his achievements, one of the most fascinating was his involvement with the Soviet Trans-Siberian Railroad. First, it was Stevens who helped keep the Russian railroad open during World War I. And then in 1930, the Soviet government turned to President Budd of the Great Northern to help save their railroad. History was to repeat itself.
I've been getting a lot of questions lately about what Burlington Northern is doing in the Soviet Union. Are we going to build a railroad over there? Just what is our interest? A little over a year ago, Jerry Grinstein was contacted by the Soviet ambassador to the United States. A real good rapport was developed between Ambassador Dubinin and Mr. Grinstein. And one of the things that Ambassador Dubinin wanted was to see if Burlington Northern Railroad could find a way to help the Soviet Union with their grain logistics problem. That's both internally and on the import side. We looked into the problem and have found some ways that make economic sense to help the Soviets, but at the same time, Burlington Northern will be creating a demand for U.S. grain in the Soviet Far East through some of the efforts that we're engaged in right now. What this does, this opens up new markets for suppliers that are located on Burlington Northern Railroad, and it creates new jobs because the volume of business on our lines will increase. And the big winner is us railroad workers. Half of the cost to operate this railroad is in wages for people like us. So whatever new business we generate through this project, half of it will come to us employees.
Unfortunately, politics has always been a part of the world grain markets. If you're a importing country, like a good customer like Japan, and you're dependent upon your food supply from abroad, you want a consistent, dependable service that you can count on.
The 17 million tons of grain ordered by the Soviet Union, in excess of that amount which we are committed to sell, will not be delivered. This grain was not intended for human consumption, but was to be used for building up Soviet livestock herds.
What happened in 1980, and as you know, is for political reasons, and you could argue the political reasons all day, but the result was an embargo against the Soviet Union that sent signals to all our customers that we're not a very reliable trading partner.
What happened is the demand for rail cars and rail transportation went down because the alternative uses for that grain were to go into store and go into store for an extended period of time. So it was disruptive to the movement of grain all along.
Certainly the embargo in 1980 of the Soviets resulted in them having to diversify their sources of grain.
The fact is that embargoes simply don't work. In the case of the Russian embargo, the Russians got their grain. They got what they needed, and their people were fed. Now, they may have been fed with a few less calories of meat, but they got the grain they needed, and it did not significantly alter the Russian action in Afghanistan.
And it's taken us Last year we had good Russian demand, but we're concerned that the same short-term political goals interfere with markets again this year.
The legislation I am introducing today directs the President to revoke and suspend all economic assistance and Ex-Im Bank credits to the Soviet Union until the Soviet government rejects the use of military force, restores political control to the duly elected governments of the Baltic States, and enters into negotiations regarding their future status in the Soviet Union on the basis of self-determination.
The legislation that is proposed by Senator Heinz, and there are some other supporters, I think is taking short-term political goals and prioritizing them into long-term market relationships. We have not learned from our 1980 embargo experience, and it affects not just the Soviets if we would create another embargo, but it also sends a chilling effect to other countries who are relying on us as a reliable supply for their food.
The issue of giving the Russians credit is one of whether we are going to help try to allow them to build a free enterprise system. In my mind, we've got to look at those people over there who are struggling with an economic system that has frankly been a disaster. I would certainly hope that we can find a way to provide credit to the Russians so that they can build an economic system that's more similar to ours. And that way, if we have a similar system and a similar philosophy about commerce, we'll have a similar philosophy about making peace throughout the world.
While Ralph Budd was in Russia, he was accompanied